Look at the Pondering Prophet. In Habakkuk chapter 2, we're kind of, after chapter 1, left in a bit of an awkward position. The prophet here seems to have more questions than he does answers. He seems to have more questions at the end of chapter 1 than he did at the beginning. At the beginning of chapter 1, it was, Lord, why aren't you doing anything? Our people are kind of ripe for judgment. Things haven't been going right for a while, but you haven't really done anything. Why haven't you judged? Why haven't you intervened? And the Lord tells Habakkuk what his plan is. He plans to judge them. He plans to bring them into captivity of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. And the prophet, getting his answer, now is confused as to why God would do it that way. Why would God use a people that's more wicked than they are to bring them into captivity? If anything, Babylonians should be judged first before we get judged. Why? Lord, it seems maybe like the Lord is doing things out of order. It seems like the Lord is doing things that maybe don't seem fair. There's just a lot of questions here as to why God would work the way that he is. And so, at the end of chapter 1, the prophet is left in a position where he's questioning why it's going to work this way. It doesn't seem like it should work this way. But thankfully, chapter 2, verse 1 sets us up with a good transition. He says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say to me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. Now, obviously, the prophet knows that if he has questioned, or if he has assumed that the Lord has done something out of order, or the Lord has done something wrong, that can't be right. So I'm going to stop. He says, I'm going to watch. I'll set me upon the tower, and I'll wait to see how the Lord replies. I want to hear what the Lord has to say. I want to hear his response. And in chapter 2, the Lord is going to speak. And in chapter 2, he's going to give 3 very specific messages, okay? 3 very specific words of confidence, words of challenge for Habakkuk as he's left to kind of interpret why God is working the way that he is. We're going to divide these up 3 ways. Number 1, the just and his faith. Okay, number 1, the just and his faith. Let's look at verse 2. It says, the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. The prophet is told to write this down and to make it clear. Make it so clear that one can run that reads it. The implication there is that someone would be able to run with this message as soon as they hear it, as soon as they were to read it. God has a purpose and a plan. In verse number 3, again, it's confirmed that not only does God have a purpose and plan, but God has a timetable. God has a timeline that he works within. All of those things are usually beyond our understanding anyway. But he's confirmed again the same thing that he was told in chapter 1 verse 5. He was told that I will work a work, and I'll work it in your days. We're told there, not only did God have a purpose, but God had a time at which he would work these. And we're told the same thing here in chapter 2. God has a purpose. God has a plan. God has a timetable. Now in verse 4, we are going to get the contrast between 2 different types of people. It says, behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright within him, but the just shall live by his faith. We're contrasted there, 2 different people. We're told about the proud, the one whose soul is lifted up, and that would be exemplified in Babylon, who would come against the children of Judah here. But we're told of the other type of people, the just, the righteous, those that have been justified, those shall live by faith. This is the verse that Paul often quotes when he makes that reference in the New Testament, right? That's certainly a phrase we're familiar with from the book of Romans. The just shall live by faith. That is not a phrase that Paul coined. That is a quote that he is giving from Scripture. That is a quote that he is giving from the Old Testament. We understand from verses 2 and 3 and from what he's told in chapter 1 that God has a purpose, that God does have a work that he intends to work in this world. The problem with that is that if you start to interpret everything based upon what you can see, if you interpret everything based upon the results that you see played out in this world, you will end up with more questions oftentimes than answers. And they are told there that the just live by faith. Okay, now that's the first answer that Habakkuk's given. He's come, he's got a lot of questions, maybe some doubts, wonders about how it is that God can work the way that he is. God appears to be working in a way that Habakkuk did not expect or intend. Honestly, it's a way that he did not want God to work. But there are two different types of people. There are those whose soul is lifted up, not upright, and then there are the just that live by faith. Just a couple of familiar verses in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. I'll read it here. It says, "For we walk by faith, not by sight." 2 Corinthians 4:18, that same context earlier said, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Okay. The ability to look beyond the here and now, the ability to trust God, the ability to live by faith in spite of what is able to be seen physically happening and going on in this world, is a mark of a true believer. It's a mark of their faith, being able to trust God despite what they see. We are not only encouraged to do so, we are told that that's the way that it needs to be. Okay? Habakkuk, you need to trust me. Okay? The just shall live by faith. So that's the first important word that comes to him. He's got a lot of questions. He's got less answers than he wants. The answers that he does have don't appear to be suitable. You have to trust me. You have to believe. Okay? The just shall live by faith. I have a purpose. I have a plan. I will work it out. He said in Habakkuk 2 verse 3, the vision is yet for an appointed time. He will work it when he intends and when he purposes and plans to do so. And it is left upon the just to believe, to trust, and to have faith. All right. So number 2, let's talk about Babylon and their proverb. In verse number 5, it says this, "Yea, also, because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people." In introducing this next thought, God is able to remind Habakkuk here that the truth of the matter is Habakkuk's not telling God anything that he doesn't already know. When you get to the end of chapter 1 and God has said that he's going to bring the Chaldees against them, you read at the end of chapter 1, verses 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, how Habakkuk just goes through a list of things, like how bad these Babylonians are. Lord, how in the world could you use them to judge us? Here's all the things that they're doing. Here's all the things that are wrong with them. How could you do that? You get over here to verse number 5, and the Lord just says, basically, I know who these people are. You're not giving me information that I didn't already know. I know that they're proud. I know that they're, verse number 5, they transgress by wine. I know that they're proud. They are drunken. He compares them. It says in verse 5, "Neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, which is never satisfied." Now that's a reference to an earlier scripture, Proverbs chapter 27. Proverbs 27 and verse number 20, it says, "Hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied." Right? Just as, hell and death, hell and destruction, they're never full, right? There's no end to their satisfaction. It's not, it's not that one more death would satisfy us, and then that would be enough. It's always the next one and the next one, right? Hell is never full, death is never satisfied. And the Lord compares Babylon to that proverb. He says in Habakkuk 2, verse 5, that he enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied. Babylon was never satisfied. It's not that taking one more nation would appease them. It's not that taking one more land, one more group of people as captive. I understand that that's not how Babylon functions. I know who these people are. I know that they conquer and they war and they are never satisfied. And it says, but gathereth unto him all nations and heapeth unto him all people. God is well aware of who these people are. Okay? Habakkuk has a good understanding, right? Habakkuk at the end of chapter 1 is able to relay a whole bunch of problems with these people. God knows exactly who Babylon is. So in verse number 6, you begin to see a selection here of woes. 5 separate woes are going to be mentioned regarding the children of Babylon, about King Nebuchadnezzar and his people. And it's going to go into detail, and it's going to show us particularly how well aware God was of these people. Okay? God is fully aware of who Babylon is. When Habakkuk said, how can you use those people? Don't you know that they're this, and this? God is actually going to tell you more about Babylon than Habakkuk was able to. And yet he is still encouraged to trust God, to know what he's doing. The just shall live by his faith. Let's look at verse number 6. Shall not these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his, how long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. Shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee, and thou shalt be for booties unto them? Because thou hast spoiled many nations, all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all that dwell therein. There is a woe pronounced upon Babylon here first for their aggression. You see in verse number 6 this taunting proverb. If Proverbs 27:20 was a good explanation of who these people are, this is a proverb that they will speak against Babylon. The first woe is for their aggression and their ill-gotten gain. He tells them there in verse number 6 to woe to him that increaseth that which is not his. God is fully well aware that Babylon has built their nation on the backs of what other people have accomplished. They have taken people from other lands. They have taken captives. They have, by war, by aggression, by ill-gotten gain, possessed that which was not theirs. And the Lord reminds Habakkuk that it's okay. They will get what's coming to them, right? You ever heard obviously we've all heard the phrase, that's going to come back to bite you, right? You do something, be careful, do that, that'll come back to bite you. Well, what does it say in verse 7? Shall they not rise up suddenly, that shall bite thee? And at the end of verse number 8, says, because thou hast spoiled many nations, all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee. God reminds Habakkuk that the tables will be turned one day. What Babylon has done to other nations, it's going to be done unto them. Okay? In giving these woes, he is reminding Habakkuk, or at least showing him, that my use of Babylon to judge you is not an indication that I view Babylon as being a righteous people. It's not an indication that Babylon has found favor with me. They are the tool that I'm going to use in this world to bring about your captivity and to bring about your judgment. That is not an indication at all that the Lord was looking in favor with them. He was well aware of all the things Habakkuk had said. I know who these people are. I know that they are an aggressive people that take what's not theirs. Don't worry, it will come back on them. It will come back to bite them. And they have spoiled many nations. All the remnant of the people shall spoil thee. Okay, that's the first woe. The second woe begins in verse number 9. Verse 9. It says, woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. Thou hast consulted shame to thy house by cutting off many people, and hast sinned against thy soul. For the stone shall cry out of the wall, and the beam out of the timber shall answer it. Woe is pronounced on them for their covetousness and for their pride. They believed that they were protected from anything happening to them because of who they had possessed, because of who they had gained victory over in the past. They believed themselves to be far above any repercussion, right? They believed themselves to be far above any nation that could attack them. In verse 9, woe to him that had coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. They believed themselves to be, exempt from any defeat, exempt from any evil or calamity that could come upon them. Reminds me, turn back to the book of Obadiah. Obadiah. And the prophet Obadiah came to prophesy against Edom, the Edomites, the descendants of Esau. And in Obadiah, verse number 3, it says, the pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? You think of the old city of Petra and the Edomites. They were known for building their habitations right into the mountainsides, right? Cut right out of the rocks. They believed that made them impregnable, that they were not going to be, or that any attack that would come against them would be successful. Their defenses would hold. There would be no way that an enemy could outlast them. The Lord tells them that you've got this pride in your heart. You dwell in the clefts of the rock. You believe that having your homes and your defenses cut out of the mountainside is going to protect you from all enemies, that you could never be brought down to the ground. And then in verse 4, though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. You can go as deep into the mountains or as high as you want to. I'll get you. I will be able to get you. And it's interesting that same language from verse 4, being exalted like an eagle or setting their nest high above among the stars. Notice in our text in Habakkuk chapter 2, in verse number 9, it's kind of a similar language, right? Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness to his house, that he may set his nest on high. Now you may get high enough in this world to feel confident that no one else is your match. Obviously, we know you're not going to get high enough or far enough from the reach of the Lord. Okay, that would be ridiculous to even think so. But there is a pride and a covetousness in man's heart that desireth that place where he feels untouchable, right? Where he feels that he is protected, that his dynasty, apparently here in verse 9, would be protected from all enemies. There's one enemy that he forgot about, and that was the Lord. Well, the third woe begins in verse number 12, and it's a woe that's pronounced upon them for their violence. Look at verse 12. Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and establish a city by iniquity. Behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the people shall labor in the very fire, and the people shall weary themselves for very vanity? For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters that cover the sea. Reminds us of a song, right, that we sing sometimes. A woe for violence. That the city of Babylon and the nation of Babylon, how it was built. And it was built on the back of violence. We are told that in verse 13, behold, is it not of the Lord that the people shall labor in the very fire? You know, here you've got this great city of Babylon that has been built. It has been built obviously on the backs of others. It has been built on the backs of a captive and a slave labor. And it says there in verse 13, it references that it was built, references people laboring in the very fire. People wearying themselves for very vanity. These people who have worked and spent their lives to build this city of Babylon for all of its glory. And you know what it said at verse 13? Is it not of the Lord? Here people have labored and labored to build this vain thing, and they never even realized that Babylon's place in history, Babylon's rise as a world power in this world is due solely to the providence of God. And how God had already had a purpose and a plan to set up kingdoms and to bring kingdoms down, to set up kingdoms and to bring kingdoms down. That has been God's plan, God's purpose that he has worked in time. Babylon came to their place in history, and they rose and they fell, never realizing who it really was. They never gave God the glory. They never gave the God of heaven glory and honor for his providence that allowed them to be the world's superpower at this time in history. But it says in verse 14, the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. The Lord knows fully that Babylon has come to prominence. Babylon is the world power at this time and at this age because of his providence, because he has risen them up. This was not because of what Babylon had built themselves. This was not due to the labor of the people or the wisdom of their kings. This was God in his providence and in his time plan allowing this nation to rise and to be in this place for this specific purpose. And he says there in verse 14, the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Habakkuk, you can rest assured this is the second great thing, right? This is the second great thing that Habakkuk needs to keep in mind and remember. The first one was that the just live by faith. The second, despite how evil Babylon is, despite what they have built, and despite the fact that they have not given me the glory for who they are and the place they have attained, you can rest assured that the earth will be filled with my glory. People will know who Jehovah is. People will know who God is. Now, obviously, this is a far-reaching prophecy, some of it in which has not even been fulfilled yet in the time which we live. Okay, there is still an aspect of this that is yet future, but we are given assurance that God's glory will be seen. Isaiah 42, verse number 8 reminds us that he's the Lord, that he is the only one, and his glory, it says, he will not share with another. Okay? We can always be reminded, we can always take assurance in the fact that God knows what he's doing and he can be trusted. God's purpose will be accomplished, and that his glory ultimately will be seen. If you don't see, let's turn to Hebrews chapter 10. There are obviously some things about Habakkuk chapter 2 that are still yet to be realized. Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 37. For yet a little while, and he that shall come will come and will not tarry. Now the just shall live by faith. But if any man draw back, my soul shall have no pleasure in him. Obviously, in verses 37 and 38, he is quoting and making reference to what's written in Habakkuk chapter 2. Did you notice the difference, though, in verse 37? When we read it in Habakkuk 2, it said this. Habakkuk 2 says, though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. In Hebrews 10, verse 37, he changes it to he. Now, it's obvious that he's referencing the same passages because the language that he uses, what he mentions in verse 38, the same quote, the just living by faith. But notice that he says, for yet a little while, and he that shall come will come and will not tarry. There are obviously some things about Habakkuk chapter 2 that still have yet a far-reaching implication into the future. But assurance is given, whether it be then or whether it be now, the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of God's glory. No one in this world is getting one up over the Lord. Okay? No matter the heights that Babylon has attained to, no matter the heights that a nation today or an individual today would attain to, we can have confidence to know that no one has gained the upper hand over the Lord. Okay? No one has usurped his glory. His glory will still ultimately be seen. We're given confidence and assurance to know that every knee someday is going to bow before the Lord Jesus Christ. All right, verse number 15, Habakkuk 2, verse 15, we have the fourth woe, which is a woe for drunkenness and lack of shame. Verse 15, it says, woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that puttest thy bottle to him and makest him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. That is absolutely no shame, right? Drunkenness and lack of shame. They put their bottle to him and makest him drunk. It wasn't enough for you to love the bottle. It wasn't enough for you to love drunkenness. You had to put the bottle to someone else to have them fall and then glare upon their nakedness. There appears to be many references to this. In verse number 5, it talks about him transgressing by wine. We're told here again in verse 15 about their problems with the bottle, figuratively. Babylon had an interesting historical problem with drink. Turn really quick to Daniel chapter 5. It's one of the things that actually led to their downfall. In Daniel chapter 5, in verse number 1, it says, Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king, his princes, his wives, his concubines might drink therein. And when they brought the golden vessels that were out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem, the king, his princes, his wives, and his concubines drank in them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, iron, wood, and of stone. That was the night Babylon fell, wasn't it? That was the night that Belshazzar saw the writing on the wall. And that was the night that Babylon was overrun by the Medes and the Persians. Verse 1 through verse 4 keeps making reference to them. They drank wine. He tasted wine in verse 2. The end of verse 2, they might drink therein. It says there in verse number 3, they drank in them. Verse number 4, they drank wine. We come over to Habakkuk chapter 2, and he transgresseth by wine. Woe to him that giveth his neighbor drink and putteth the bottle to him. This was a terrible thing, right? This seemed to be something that these folks enjoyed. And it was actually part of their downfall. Verse 17, verse 16. We didn't read 16. Habakkuk 2, verse 16. Thou art filled with shame for glory. Drink thou also, and let thy foreskin be uncovered. The cup of the Lord's right hand shall be turned unto thee, and shameful spewing shall be on thy glory. If verse number 15 shows them to be a shameless people, right? No shame. Then verse number 16, thou art filled with shame for glory. They'll be ashamed. They're going to be filled with shame. Verse 17, for the violence of Lebanon shall cover thee, and the spoil of beasts which made them afraid because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land of the city, and of all that dwell therein. This was going to come back upon them. They were going to receive it back again. All right, verse 18, the fifth woe, 18 and 19. What profiteth the graven image that the maker thereof hath graven it, the molten image and a teacher of lies, that the maker of his work trusteth therein to make dumb idols? We read about that, right? They praised the gods of silver and of gold, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. We read that in Daniel 5. Woe unto him that saith to the wood, awake, to the dumb stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is laid over with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in the midst of it. A woe unto these people for their idolatry. They consulted with graven images. Images, he says, that have no breath in them. It's just wood. It's just, so you overlaid it with gold. That makes a big difference. They're idols. They're images. There's no life in them. And yet this is who Babylon praises. This is who they worship. And a woe is pronounced on them for that idolatry. You see, you get to the end of chapter 1, and Habakkuk says, man, these people are really, really bad. When you get to the end of chapter 2, you understand God knows how bad they are. God has seen and recognized all of these different things, and he has pronounced woe on them for each of those things. And Habakkuk is reminded smack dab in the middle of this, don't worry, my glory will be seen. As evil a people as Babylon is, as many questions as you have about why I would use them, God gives him the reassurance that his glory would be seen. Okay? Even if it's something that Habakkuk doesn't necessarily understand. How could God get glory doing it this way? Rest assured, my glory will fill the earth. And then number 3, lastly, let's talk about the Lord and his temple. And of course, we're down to the last verse. It says in verse 20, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Habakkuk is given assurance, and this third is the last great thing to remember. The Lord is on his throne. He is always ready, prepared. He's ready in these verses, just as he's ready to pronounce doom upon Judah and send them into captivity and have them under judgment. He is equally just as ready when it's all over to pronounce woe and judgment upon Babylon. Okay? The Lord sits high in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. That is something that we can take to mind, that we can take consolation in, is that we know who our Lord is. Okay? He is not one who is going to be caught off guard. He's not one that's going to be overruled. He's not one that's going to be taken aback by any such thing. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. That answers a lot of questions, right? Chapter 1 maybe ends with a lot of questions. Now, chapter 2 does not tell you why God used Babylon. He does not answer the question of why are you using this people. Here's what he is told. The just shall live by faith. Trust me. Believe me. Believe in the one that has a plan and a purpose and a timeline as mentioned in verses 2 and 3. Okay? If I'm telling you I have a plan and a purpose and I'm telling you I have a timeline, verse 4, trust me. Okay? So, trust, the just shall live by faith. The earth shall be filled with the knowledge of his glory. Okay? God will work all things for his own glory. Okay? No matter if we think that the way he's going about that is wrong, or the way that he's going about that is a way that we wouldn't go about it, we're given the assurance he will work things out for his glory. And then in verse 20, the Lord is in his holy temple. Okay? Don't forget who the Lord is. Okay? He is the one that sits on the throne. He is the one that is in control of this entire universe. And that gets down to the very nations of men and individual men, who he rises up for a time, who he brings down after that time. What nations he allows to rise, what nations he puts down. All of these things are done under the watch of one who sits far above us. Okay? The Lord who sits in his high and his holy temple. So let all the earth keep silence before him. He said in verse number 1, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower and will watch to see what he will say. Well, watch then. Okay? Just watch, because the Lord can be trusted. The Lord will always do what is right. The Lord will always work things to his purpose and his glory, and the Lord will never vacate his throne. Okay? So these are great, great answers to Habakkuk. What the answer he doesn't get is why God is going to use Babylon specifically, but he's given the answer and told, I know more about Babylon than you do. I know who these people are. I can name their sins down to the nth degree. But you can trust me, and I'll work this out for my glory, and I've not abandoned my place. Okay? All right. Let's have a word of prayer. Next week, we'll look at chapter 3, and we'll see Habakkuk's response.